Hey, good afternoon. It's Tuesday, September 20th, and welcome to my channel, Everyday Talk 24/7. Really special to have you along today. I'm going to take a quick break from looking at 2 Samuel 12 and just have a few words of comment about the earthquake that just happened off the coast of Mexico yesterday. 7.6 was felt strongly in Mexico City and certainly upsetting to a lot of folks, caused some damage, was not catastrophic, but still, nevertheless, a reminder of the power of the earth. And the next step from that is this power of the earth is not random, but this power that shapes our lives is all part of God's plan and purpose. And these events, these natural disasters, quote unquote, these great events in geology and meteorology and those kinds of things, they are designed to remind us of who God is. And I've spoken fairly extensively about Job 37 many times, where this is laid out for us. Also, in my little book, When Life Turns Upside Down, talks about these kinds of events that are happening. And I wrote the book in the middle of or at the beginning of the COVID impact, but it's a whole lot more than that. Let me talk about earthquakes just for a second. In 1964, on Good Friday, earthquake struck just south of Anchorage, Alaska. It was a 9.2 on the Richter scale, second largest ever recorded, largest in North America. The damage was just amazing. But because it's a very lightly populated area, there was only a few folks, were actually killed because of the quake in the low hundreds. But if such a quake had occurred other places along the West Coast, it would have been in the tens of thousands and maybe even the hundreds of thousands of folks that would have died from that earthquake. 40 years later in 2004, there was the earthquake in the 8 range and the tsunami on Christmas in Indonesia, Christmas Eve, that killed over 250,000 people in widespread devastation. So this 7.6 in Mexico City is just a reminder of how vulnerable we are to the power of God. This is particularly true with regard to earthquakes. All of this phenomena, obviously, but in earthquakes, in Colossians 1, we read that the earth is held together, literally, by the power and will of Jesus Christ. And when that power is released, when the Lord chooses not to hold everything together, or in particular areas, we have something called earthquakes. Because the earth moves up and down. There's seismic shifts. Sometimes they're very tiny. Sometimes they're massive. We are vulnerable to the will and power of God. And God shows us these things, what Job 37 reminds us of. God shows us these things to remind us of his great power and our vulnerability. And yet we continue to act like we're invulnerable, and we continue to act like these things are odd or strange, or this kind of a seismic event, earthquake, a giant hurricane, a tornado, tsunamis, massive ice storms aren't going to happen to us, but they do happen regularly. We have a large portion of our country right now which is undergoing a drought, and we think that, this has nothing to do with God. This has people not being wise according to certain people's standards. God is involved in all that we do. And in the second chapter of this little book, I draw three conclusions that I want to draw to us. There are three realities. The first is these upside-down moments, these earthquakes, these quote-unquote catastrophic natural disasters, they're not to be unexpected. They are what has marked the course of human history. We can ignore them all we want, but they should not be unexpected. They should be expected. Second, God is in the middle of these things. They're under His control. Again, that passage in Job 37 makes that clear. And third, because He's in the middle of that, we can know peace and security in the middle of these things. Because we know these things aren't random. We know that God has a plan and purpose. So when we read in Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, which happens in these massive earthquakes, and especially what leads to the tsunamis. Though those waters roar and foam, the mountains quake with their surging. In the midst of all this, the psalmist tells us there is a river whose stream makes glad the city of God, the people of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. Today, the Most High dwells in this temple of His people. This is where the temple is today. This is where God lives. God is within her. She will not fall. God will be her help at break of day. That's the promise that we have. As we look at these events, these mind-blowing, powerful events, of which we just had a small reminder of God's power in this latest earthquake off of Mexico. The reality of it is, these things could happen to any one of us at any time. We are vulnerable before God, and yet we act like we can do what we want. We act like He has nothing to do with my life, when in fact, He has everything to do with my life. We can try and have all these explanations of why all these events happen around us. But the reality is that God is the one who's in control. And He does these things not randomly, but to remind us of His great awe and power, which is exactly the point that Job 37 makes. He uses floods and snowstorms, which halt us in our tracks, to make us stop and contemplate how vulnerable we are before God. I pray that we would see these events and wind up seeing the earthquakes, the massive power, and connect that to unshakable faith. That's what Psalm 46 is telling us. Because our faith is not based upon what I generate. My faith is based upon the power of God working in me through the call of the Holy Spirit. And because it comes from God, my faith is unshakable. I don't have to give way to fear, even in the midst of something as devastating as a powerful earthquake. I pray that you would give some pause and thought to the power of God. Use these events, this earthquake, most recent one in Mexico, to remind us of who God is, who we are, and why we need to run to Him and stop trying to figure out life on our terms, but rather grasp the unshakable faith that is ours, even in the midst of earthquakes, both in terms of geologic and relational. God is our ever-present help, and that's a blessing. Give me some thoughts, feedback. We got Q&A Friday coming up this week. Love to hear them. Thanks so much for just joining us. Check us out every day, talk247.com. If you haven't subscribed, turn on post notifications. These videos will come right to you. Such a blessing to be with you. Even in the midst of earthquakes, we can have unshakable faith. You have a great day. Bye-bye.